So let me talk about the context for a lot of what Maine faces, because you've got an enormous platform, great platform, foundation here with quality of place, quality of life. But what I'm going to talk about are some of the other trends and dynamics that are underway, and most importantly, the solutions that are being forged in cities or metros that are middleweights. They're 1.5 to 2.5 million, and then try to translate that to the state. So, everything has changed, right? We're going through a period of economic restructuring, demographic transformation, technological innovation, which is leaving large portions of our population behind. And there's an enormous amount of economic insecurity and cultural anxiety, not just here, but really throughout Europe as well. This is what we got. It's not surprising when you go through periods of this tumult, the angry populists tend to emerge, right? And so the Brexit vote, Trump's victory, the rise of the alt-right in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe because of the refugee crisis. There's a lot of tumult in the world today, and this is what we wake up every day talking about, right? But there is another structural shift in the world today, which is really going to have long-standing impacts this century, which is that globalization, in many respects, has diminished the role of the nation-state and elevated the role of the city-state. And I would argue that a portion of Maine, like many parts of New England, not all of Maine, you're very large, but a portion of Maine essentially is a city-state. And you need to think about this place as a virtual, connected, collective economy. And those are the places in the world that have been elevated for a variety of reasons, because when you have these connected, collected places, that's where innovation and productivity tend to get created and then deployed. It doesn't happen everywhere, even though we're incredibly wired in the world. It tends to happen in dense places, particularly in the cores of cities and metros. When you have innovative growth, you have the vehicle for economic opportunity and social mobility. Participatory democracy is a main thing. You knew participatory democracy before it mattered, and you practice it all the time. That's a wave of the world. And sustainable development is obviously critical, not just for environmental purposes, but again for economic innovation. So there's a reason why the world, though very large, is beginning to concentrate. What our book focused on was the rise of cities, metropolitan areas, communities as the problem solvers in the world. 20th century problem solving was top down, nation state, driven by government, and really driven by compartmentalized, specialized agencies. If you had a problem, I was the chief of staff at HUD, you had a housing problem, you go to HUD. Transportation problem, you go to DOT. You have an environmental problem, you go to EPA. The 21st century is bottom up, really led by cities and communities, multi-sector, yes, government, but also private, civic, university, community, and interdisciplinary. And it's that last piece which I think is the most important thing. If you're going to crack at hard challenges, you can't do it through just specialization. You have to do it through the connective tissue. So new localism, in our view, was essentially a philosophy and practice of problem solving for a network world, right? It doesn't mean the nation state has no role. They tend to be platforms. They tend to provide the safety net. They tend to provide common rules for the market and civil rights enforcement and environmental enforcement. They protect the homeland. Yeah, there's a reason for the nation state, but a parallel operating system in the world is emerging, and it really is the city-state. And that's where all the affirmative energy is. The national government, at the end of the day, is just a government. And states, provinces, are just governments, which means they can be hijacked by partisanship, and they are. Cities and communities are networks. And you don't really get rewarded in most places for ideological obstruction. You tend to get rewarded for actually doing stuff. So if you're in an urban or community world, what you look for are norms. You don't look for laws and rules. You look for norms and models, institutional models in particular, that then can be adapted across across the world. So this book is really around the economy, growth, governance, and finance. And I'll talk about Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and Copenhagen. They're middleweight cities in the world, but I think it's the principles and lessons that fundamentally do apply to this place, and we can sort of end with that. So let's talk about Pittsburgh. I presume a lot of people have been to Pittsburgh, right? It's a gorgeous place. And, you know, to a large extent, it's really invented sort of a high road economy path towards its future. This is what it looked like in the end of the 1970s. It was the steel capital of the universe. That all ended in the late 70s as steel began to move offshore. Interestingly enough, the rebirth of Pittsburgh began in the 3 Mile Island disaster. We had this huge nuclear disaster. A lot of Pittsburgh companies owned the facility or were involved in the facility, so they tried to start thinking through how are we going to assess the damage first, and then how are we going to clean this up? And they were coming up with price tags of the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and this is 1970 money, so it's obviously a lot more today. Ultimately, they went to see this guy, Red Whittaker. He's a roboticist before anyone knew what a roboticist was. So he started inventing robots, you know, like kids playing with those little cars, you know, robots that you can move around, basically engineered from somewhere far away, because no one's going to the bottom of 3 Mile Island, right? And so this is the beginning of autonomous vehicles, right? So he came up with a plan to assess the damage of 3 Mile Island and then figure out the cleanup for basically $1 million, okay? With this children's crusade of roboticists. And what's interesting about the rise of robotics or autonomous vehicles or artificial intelligence or machine learning or big data analytics in Pittsburgh is it all happens in this little place called the Oakland neighborhood. Because that's where Carnegie Mellon is, and that's where the University of Pittsburgh is, and that's where the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is. In a big world, there's a magic half a square mile. You go to Carnegie Mellon, you fall out of bed, you're in Pittsburgh. So all these brainiacs in this very little place are basically connecting with each other in a seamless way, both with people who actually speak the same language, technological language to some extent, but also people who are in marketing or finance or accounting or law, who are beginning, or design, creative design, beginning to connect with those hard sectors of the economy. Pittsburgh is a playground of innovation today. And if you go to Pittsburgh, it's wild what's really going on. Because it basically rests on this small spatial geography of innovation, an organic innovation district. I'll come back to that as we think about May. So there's about 12 next generation technologies in the world today. It'll be about half of global GDP in about 10 or 15 years. Pittsburgh's in 5 of them. I mean, literally on the ground floor of 5 next generation technologies. Pittsburgh will be a very wealthy place for a very long period of time, unless they completely screw it up, right? And again, Maine's not going to be at the sort of front end of the invention side, but you might be on the deployment side, and that's something to think about. So Pittsburgh is essentially, you know, its city now. I mean, you walk around, a bunch of millennials, it's all wonderful restaurants. But the most important thing to think about, now that we're having this Amazon HQ2 competition, right, is companies from Silicon Valley, Seattle, all over the world go to Pittsburgh, not because of tax avoidance, but because they have to be there. They have to be near the secret sauce, which is talent, right? Talent in a very small place. So Google now is about 800 workers in Pittsburgh. They started with about 5 on Carnegie Mellon's campus. And then they grew to 10, and they grew to 25. This is how your economy evolves. It's not just me getting 50,000 workers from Amazon by throwing the whole fiscal story. So the thing to think about with Pittsburgh is a city or a city-state must think like a system and act like an entrepreneur. That is 21st century economic development. A system, you think across, you think about multiple interventions. You don't think about that siloed, vertical, hierarchical, oh, we're just gonna widen the road to fix congestion. That didn't work, right? You think about a whole bunch of different things. And acting like an entrepreneur means you take risks, but you're also agile. You can move when things change. That's what Pittsburgh has done, backed by an enormous amount of private and civic capital. They moved from a Rust Belt to a Brain Belt. They didn't look back. They saw the steel that left. It took about 5 years of depression to get over it. But once they got over it, they bet on the future. They bet on centers of excellence. They bet on technologies that, frankly, we didn't even have terms for 30 or 40 years ago. But they said, that's where we're going. We're going to take risks. We're going to fail. We're going to make mistakes with public, private, and civic money. But we know we have to get on that path. You know, Pittsburgh was a maker city historically. They still are a maker city. They still make things in Pittsburgh. There's different things. And they figured out ways to do it to bring more people along for the ride. And philanthropy is critical. If you didn't have Heinz, if you didn't have Hillman, if you didn't have R.K. Mellon, you wouldn't have the patient capital that's there. So philanthropy is critical. Let me talk about Indianapolis. Indianapolis, in many respects, may even be more of a critical story for you. How many people have been to Indianapolis? You know, it's a wonderful city today, right? You went back mid-1970s, this was fun in Indianapolis. A bunch of guys go down with shotguns to the downtown, and you shoot pigeons. There was nothing in the downtown of Indianapolis. The streets rolled up at 5 o'clock at night. Kurt Vonnegut, great American novelist, grew up in Indianapolis and said, this is a place where 364 days you play miniature golf, and the last day you go to the Speedway. This was the most boring place in the United States. So the business, political, and civic leaders got together and said, we got to restore the core, right? You're talking about downtowns and main streets. This was their plan. Now their idea was to become the amateur sports capital of the United States. So if you were going to train for the Olympics, irrespective of what the hell you were training for, you had to go to Indianapolis. So they built a whole bunch of facilities, you know, for all these different Olympic sports. And then they went out and stole the Baltimore Colts in the middle of the night. And that went so well for them, not for Baltimore, that they then went to Kansas City and stole the NCAA headquarters. And Kansas City and Pittsburgh, Indianapolis competed for the NCAA. And all the Kansas City people were able to say at the end of the process is these people are insane. They will do anything to get them to come to Indianapolis. So they got very good at stealing things. And then they got very good at institutions. They created an Indiana Sports Corporation, public, private, and civic. And these folks sat together to figure out how do we become the amateur sports capital and then the professional sports capital of the universe, right? At some point they realized how much beer and hot dogs can you consume, right? So they went from basketball to biotech. And they used the same thinking about institutional structure that are networks and that are formal to basically begin to steer and channel the life sciences economy in not just Indianapolis, but in the state of Indiana, the second largest exporter of life science products in the United States today is the state of Indiana. And it's because for the last 20 years, what you've had are 60 CEOs, private corporations like Lilly and Roche Diagnostics, big philanthropies like Lilly, and universities that sit together in the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. And they basically have created all these initiatives, for the most part, focused on life sciences, right, and advanced healthcare. And they've raised an enormous amount of private capital to basically invest in local companies, angel seed, series, etc., but then also build their own research institutes, not waiting for federal dollars. The state of Indiana is not going to do anything, so they're building it with private and civic money, and then they're going out and stealing faculty from all over the world. So they're still stealing stuff, but now they're stealing talent as opposed to sports teams. What they say when they meet is we're going to be an ecosystem rather than an ecosystem, right? Imagine being the head of the Lilly Endowments by $13 billion, or Lilly Corporation. These are major institutions, but when they get in that room with the other CEOs They're basically there as just one part of the ecosystem, ready to collaborate, to compete. The mechanics of collaboration in the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, and I guarantee nothing like this exists in Maine or most other parts of the United States or the world, is they come into a room backed by capital and they meet to decide rather than discuss. Think about that for a second. They meet to decide. They actually make investments together in the future of that place. They operate at the district level, the city level, the metropolitan level, the regional level, and the state level. So they're politically smart. I was in Notre Dame a couple months ago. They said, oh, we just joined the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, and the head of our university is now participating because we have something to add to this. We're very big in IT in South Bend and Notre Dame, and that's part of life sciences and healthcare. Very smart. And finally, they're harnessing private and civic wealth. This is not public. This is private and civic and university. And they figured out a way where they just don't occasionally get together and say, wouldn't it be nice? They design it, they finance it, they deliver it. That's a different kind of philosophy. The last piece is around finance. So we couldn't find an American example for this. So we went to Copenhagen. I know it's not like tough, right? Copenhagen is a wonderful place. We know they like to cycle. It's become essentially the third wealthiest city in the world. It was not like that 30 years ago. It was flat on its back. It had lost an enormous amount of industry. It was basically on the brink of fiscal bankruptcy. The harbor was gone. It had basically moved to Malmö in southern Sweden. So basically they had to come up with a big idea. Their big idea was to build a state-of-the-art transit system for the entire city without spending a kroner of taxes. This is when they had to start thinking, right? And I think this is where the United States is today. We can't tax it anymore. We can't wait for the feds or wait for the states for the most part. So what they did is they created this one institution, the Copenhagen City and Port Development Corporation. And they basically said, this is going to be a different kind of institution. It's going to be publicly owned, right? So the mayor and the national leaders is going to be 55% owned by the city and 45% owned by the national government. And it's going to be publicly led, but it's going to be professionally managed, right? Because we're going to give them all the land we own, that's the government, between the airport and the downtown, the Orestat district, and all along the harbor. We're just going to give all the land, all the public assets, to this publicly owned, privately driven corporation. So they took the Orestat district, they took North Harbor, South Harbor. It's a massive harbor, one of the great ports that no longer really operates except for cruise ships. And they gave it to this public-private institution. And what they said to them is, when you regenerate this area of Copenhagen, as we know you will, we want the revenue stream to go to service the debt on this transit system. That's how we're going to finance this thing, right? It's going to be public asset corporation that generates public wealth. And instead of just privatizing all the wealth, we'll sell all the land to a bunch of, investment banks from Wall Street or something. We're going to keep an equity stake. So as the value appreciates, we know it will, the revenue will go to finance the infrastructure. They now have a wonderful transit system, not a kroner of taxes. This is a different way of financing the future. We do not do this in the United States. What we have is a whole bunch of public authorities, convention authorities, port authorities, airport authorities, redevelopment authorities, water and sewers. We got a lot of authorities, right? All built after the Second World War. They focus on their bit. They don't really take a systemic view of value creation, and therefore we don't really have public wealth in the U.S. So, former mayor of Copenhagen says, we're not here for the quick fix. We're not here just to sell off our treasures because in a fire sale, because we have to sort of balance the budget that year. We're here for the long haul. We're thinking 25 years, we're thinking 50 years, and we're thinking about value, creating value, capturing value for the public. The thing about Copenhagen is they know what they own as the public sector. I guarantee you that the public sector in the United States has no clue what it owns. because it's just all fragmented across all these different authorities and municipal government and counties and states. And we don't really know what we own in the U.S. as the public sector. Therefore, we don't know what its value is, and therefore we don't know how to aggregate it and dispose of it in intelligent ways. They merged public entities. They dealt with fragmentation, both at this corporation level, but also with local jurisdictions. Denmark used to have about a couple hundred municipalities. They're now down to less than 100. That might be interesting to me. And then finally, they came up with this public-private management model. So in the US, we think about public-private partnerships, which tend to be transactions. In Northern Europe, they think about public-private institutions, right? And therein lies the difference. They do PPPs within these institutions, but these public-private institutions really are looking out for the public interest for the long haul. So how do you build a nation of problem solvers, and how do you actually apply these principles to a place like Maine? You know, we have a couple challenges to begin with. You know, for every Pittsburgh, lots of places tend to subsidize consumption rather than invest in innovation. And it's innovation which has the multiplier effect. If you really want to build sort of a long-standing, resilient economy, you invest in innovation. And you invest in it in these dense, co-located, concentrated, walkable, authentic, I mean, everything the mayor was saying, that's where you want your innovative economy. For in Indianapolis, we do have a lot of stakeholders who say they collaborate, and they do, but it's informal, it's not structured, and therefore it doesn't have the really 2 + 2 = 5 effect that they have in Indianapolis. And then for every Copenhagen, we don't even know what we own, so it's really hard to think about long-term value for the public or public wealth. We know what private wealth is in the United States. We don't know what public wealth is. And that really is the story of Scandinavia and the Dutch and the Germans. They understand what public wealth is, and they basically act on it. If you're going to move forward, what you really need to do in this crazy world is first know what your edge is. I think quality of place is Maine's calling card, right? It is really one of the most beautiful places on the face of this earth. It's not enough, right? It's really not enough. You have to match that with some kind of innovative niche that is true to who you are, right? Given your past legacies, whether it's in forestry, whether it's in farming or fishing, whatever it is, and given your sensitivity to environmental dynamics. So the thing about Northern Europe, they're not like us in terms of next generation technology innovation. But what they see coming is the pressures of climate change in the blue economy, around sustainable urbanization in Africa and Asia, and that's what they're perfecting in the Dutch and the Danish and the German and the Swedish economies. They're basically preparing themselves to invent products that they can export as the world really goes haywire because of climate, right? I think Maine's got a play there, but it won't just happen because you're environmentally sensitive. I mean, that's good, but what you really now need to think about is your network of universities and corporations and startups and scale-ups, and the concentration effect of that around certain niches in that blue economy or green economy. That really potentially is where you need to go, and that was really what we were saying in Charting Maine's Future. Second, who's in charge? The government's important. It really is important. The public sector is critical. It's not the only player. I mean, when you have the co-location effect with Bangor Savings Bank going, you know, to where they're going with 700 workers, that just shows you. Yes, the public sector was involved in that, but that's also about a private anchor institution deciding that density and walkability is its future as opposed to having its IT unit out by the airport or whatever. So that's critical. There's multiple stakeholders in charge. And in this state, what's odd is that some of them don't live here really year long. I mean, they come here essentially as 5-month tourists, right? The key is to keep them here, to get a portion of their business This is what Asheville has done so well. This is what Miami has done so well with the Latin Americans. I mean, that's really, you've got to play both in a sector and a niche, but also because of all these wealthy people who are coming here because of your quality of place. But they need to start leaving something behind, particularly on the company side. And the last part is, where's your power? Cities and city-states are not just about government, right? We tend to think about power, particularly when you wake up every day and all we talk about is the White House or Congress, which is obviously very important. But we tend to think about power as governmental power. What this book was about is market power, it's civic power, and how you identify it, and how you leverage it, and how you basically use it to serve the broader citizenry. And I think there's a lot of marketed civic power in this state. You got a lot of civic power because you have a lot of different kinds of institutions that are very dedicated, sometimes locally, sometimes at the state level, to maintaining your quality of life, right? So there's a lot to build on there. But your market power is also there. It just hasn't really been leveraged or unveiled. And it's in these particular niches, and it's around this wealth that comes and goes, right? But now it needs to find a way to land, and now it needs to find a way to invest. So we'll talk more about this, but I think what's happening in the world today is not a cyclical thing. It's not just because we elected a narcissistic chief to be our president. I mean, that's cyclical. Donald Trump will leave. He'll leave either in 2020 or 2024. I hope it's soon. He's really corroding our culture in many ways. It's going to take a while to get beyond what we did here. But what's happening with localism is structural. It really is not just because of Brexit or Trump or populism. Right? It's because the world has shifted and power has been pushed downwards in the world. And we can wait for the next generation of smart federal policy. Occasionally it happens, usually it's accidental. But we can wait for the next generation of state policy to happen. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. They're critical players. But the cavalry's not coming anymore. It really is not coming. This is the level, the city level, the community level, the regional level. It's where our strength lies in the United States, right? We're a federal republic, not a federal government. And so we need to be thinking more about what are our particular assets and advantages, and how do we build these networks across multiple sectors and disciplines to leverage them to the full. So I'll stop there and look forward to the conversation.